me do something else that may surprise you in preparation for as we go forward. Most of you are aware of the fact that 4 disciples came to Jesus for a confidential briefing on his second coming. It occurred on the Mount of Olives. We call that the Olivet discourse. It's recorded in 3 Gospels, Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13. And I think most of us tend to lean on the Matthew account for 2 reasons. It was a Jewish issue, and he was Jewish, but more importantly, he took shorthand. So most of his discourses are more thorough than the others because he had that as a job skill. You'll find most commentaries will tell you that Matthew chapter 24 and the recording in Luke chapter 21 are the same thing. And I'm going to ask you to read it, not just in Matthew 24, but in Luke 21, and compare them closely and see if they are the same thing. And I think you may discover that they're not. They are different. And they're different in some non-trivial ways. Now, rather than leave that just hanging, I got a few minutes here, let me just throw it in here. In Matthew 24, verses 4 through 10, it mentions false Christs, wars, famines, death, martyrs, and global chaos. Luke does the same thing in chapter 21, 4 through the end of the chapter. What makes this interesting to us when we finish the 7 churches is we'll discover in the book of Revelation chapter 6, we have the 4 horsemen and so forth. We'll notice the pattern of the 4 horsemen and what follows parallels the false Christ, wars and rumors and famines and death and the martyrs and so forth of the Olivet discourse in both Matthew and Luke. You with me so far? There's a parallelism that's widely recognized by most scholars. Except there's something else that's kind of interesting. It seems that Luke and Matthew have a different focus. Luke mentions that cluster of signs, but he says in verse 12, but before all these, certain things are going to happen. Matthew mentions those same cluster of signs, says all these are the beginning of sorrows, then shall they. In other words, after this. In other words, there seems to be these signs, false Christ, wars, famines, earthquakes. What Luke talks about comes before them, and what Matthew talks about comes after them. Wow. Are they talking about the same thing, or are they talking about different things? See, one's before these, one's after, or then shall they. Well, let's try to take another look at this. If that's Luke 21, and that's Matthew 24, the wars, famines, earthquakes, and so forth are a cluster of events that sound very much the same in both accounts. No problem so far. But Luke talks about things that happened before those signs, and Matthew after. Luke talks about the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD very clearly, and that occurs before these signs. Matthew talks about destruction, I'll call that desolation number 2, that's not only after these signs, it's after an event that Luke doesn't even mention, the abomination of desolation. And it has a destruction of Jerusalem. It has a specific label given to it by Jesus Christ, the Great Tribulation. So suddenly we begin to realize that in this discussion, Luke seems to have focused on the fall of Jerusalem, and there's 2 different desolations. He's focused on the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, clearly. And that's what causes so many scholars who presume that they're just crunched together as one account. They're saying, well, gee, that what the Bible talks about happened back in 70 AD. That did. The other hasn't happened yet. You understand the difference? If this is an example of where I believe precision is valuable, because there are all kinds of good scholars stumbling over this issue by not recognizing that some of the things Luke is talking about is before those signs, and what Matthew's talking about is after those signs. And the reason I bring this up here is that, by the way, see, Matthew is Jewish, and he's focusing on the time of Jacob's trouble. After these signs, you got the abomination, then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains and so forth. At the fall of Jerusalem, under Luke, it was very similar. Again, Jerusalem was surrounded by armies, but there was an unexplained relaxation of the siege. And the Christians in Jerusalem were able to slip out. That's well documented in Josephus and elsewhere. And then it was reestablished, and of course they had over 1,100,000 people slaughtered in those 9 months. That's all. We have eyewitness accounts. You can check that out. But the point is, that is not the same event as occurs after the abomination of desolation, which comes after the same list of signs. You with me so far? So check it out. And I think it'll clear a lot of misunderstandings that are going on. But the other thing, the reason I bring it in, the 7 letters, 7 churches are focusing on a period of time after the fall of Jerusalem, but before the war, before Revelation chapter 6, verse 1. So I thought that would be useful at this point, because you're going to want to understand that before we jump into Smyrna to see where they fit in. So read